Hi everyone and welcome to activity 3 on the smartest giant in town. Now I think today's activity is one of my favourites because it's a chance for you to be the author of the story. Now can you remember, an author is the person who writes the story. So today you're going to have a go at writing your own version of the smartest giant in town. First thing we need to do before we write our story is have a think about the plot points. Now can you remember, the plot points are where we break up a story into chunks and we can see what happens. It's a bit like a story map where we look at all the different plot points, the things that happen in the story. It's really useful to look at the plot points in a story because it lets us know where our story starts, where our story ends, and everything that happens in between. It means we can write some super sentences that are making sure we're not missing any details. So, let's have a think about the smartest giant in town. Now, the first thing that happens in the story is that we meet George, and George is a very scruffy giant. And George is quite sad about the fact he's the scruffiest giant in town, and he wants to change that. So, he goes to the shop. That's our next plot point. He goes into the shop and he buys a shirt, some trousers, a belt, a tie, some socks and some shoes. That's the next part of our story. So that's the second plot point. The next plot point is where George meets the giraffe. And the giraffe is very, very cold. And the giraffe is very, very sad. And what does George do? George gives his tie to the giraffe to use as a scarf. Now I can remember it's scarf because scarf rhymes with giraffe. So that's our third plot point, is where George meets the giraffe. So already I'm starting to think about what sentences I might want to use when I write my version of the story. Now the next plot point number 4, is when George meets the goat. Now the goat is on a boat and something has happened to the goat's boat. Can you remember? The goat's boat's sail has flown away and he can't find his sail anywhere, so he's very, very sad. So what happens then in that plot point? So George has met the goat and he knows the goat's feeling sad, so he gives him his shirt. Okay, so that's what happens at that plot point. Then our 5th plot point, so this is number 5, where George meets the mouse family, and the mouse family are very, very sad because their house has burnt down. That's not a good thing to happen, is it? So George thinks, how can I help? And what does he give the mouse family? He gives them his shoe to use as a house, doesn't he? He gives his shoe as a house for a mouse. And again, it rhymes, so it helps me to remember that as well. Then the next plot point 6, is where George the giant meets the fox. Now the fox is at a campsite. He's about to go camping in his tent, but the fox is very sad too because all our animals have been quite sad, haven't they? But why is the fox sad? The fox is sad because he lost his sleeping bag in a puddle, didn't he? Oh no. So what does George do to help at this plot point? He gives the fox his sock, doesn't he? And he can use the sock as a lovely cosy sleeping bag. Super work. Right, so that is plot point 6 done. The next plot point 7. Plot point 7 is where George the giant meets the dog. Now the dog is trying to cross a bog, isn't he? And that rhymes again. And what does George give the dog to help him cross the bog? He gives him his belt, doesn't he? Well done. He gives him his belt to help him cross the bog. Now our next plot point is where George's trousers fall down because a big gust of wind blew, didn't it? And he was hopping his way down the road, but because he's not got a belt, his trousers fell down. Oh no. Okay, so that's our next plot point. So you can think about a sentence you might want to write for that plot point. And then for our last plot point is where George is very sad because he's now the coldest giant in town. So he decides to go back to the shop to see if he can buy some more clothes. But oh no, the shop is closed. But luckily he spots a bag by the door. And in that bag is his nightgown and his old brown sandals. And he pops those on and he says, now I'm the comfiest giant in town. And he walks back to his house. But who's waiting for him outside his house? All his friends that he helped, they are there with a big box and a letter that they've written for him. And they give him a crown, don't they? They give him a crown to say thank you for being the kindest giant in town. Okay, so that's our plot points in our story. We've got a lot. We've got 9 plot points for our story, and they are going to help you to write your very own sentences to tell me what is happening at each plot point. So today you're going to write about the first 5 plot points. We're not going to write it all in one go because it's a lot of plot points. So we're going to start with the first 5 plot points. Now let's have a go at one together. So we're going to have a look at the first plot point. So the first plot point is where we meet our character George, and he's very sad because he feels like he's the scruffiest giant in town. So I'm going to think about some sentences I might want to write for this plot point. You can have a think too in your head about the sentences you might want to write. Now I think I'm going to start my story by introducing my character, by letting my reader, the person reading my story, know who my main character is. So I'm going to say, there is a giant called George. There is a giant called George. That's my first sentence. Now when I'm writing my sentence, I need to be using my always checklist, and it's there at the bottom for you to help you. So I'm going to be using my phonics and my spellings to help me. I'm going to be writing my letters really neatly. I'm going to be using a full stop and capital letters, and I'm making sure to leave a big gap between my words, and I'm also making sure I'm writing on the line, okay? So that's lots of things to remember. There's 6 things there for you to try and remember when you're writing your sentence. So there's my first sentence done. There is a giant called George. Now I know that my reader, the person reading my story, knows who my main character is now. But I'm going to try and use some adjectives to make it even more exciting and give my reader some more detail about my character. So I'm going to say, he has brown sandals. Ooh. And I'm going to use and to add another idea in. He has brown sandals and messy hair. Okay, so there's my next sentence. He has brown sandals and messy hair. Now I'm going to read back what I've written so far just to check that I'm happy with what I've written. So let's see, I've written, there is a giant called George. He has brown sandals and messy hair. Oh, I'm happy with that because I've used some adjectives and I've introduced my character. Right, let's see what I could write next. Now I think I want to let the person reading the story know that this is when he is the most scruffy. He is the scruffy giant, isn't he? But I think I'm going to try and use my suffix est. So I'm going to say, he is the scruffiest giant in town. There we go. So I've done 3 sentences about my first plot point. You might want to do 3 as well. Now you can write as many sentences as you need for that first plot point. Remember, we're only talking about that first plot point. Right, the second plot point in our story. Now I know that this is when George the Giant goes to the shop and buys himself some new clothes. And I've just looked back at our story map just to remind me, and I know that that's the next one we're doing. Now I want to explain to my reader where George has gone. So I think I'm going to say, he went to the shop. He went to the shop. Now I've had to use some tricky words there. I wonder if you can spot them. But then for the last word, shop, the last word in my sentence, he went to the shop. I'm going to use my phonics to help me. So I'm going to listen to the word shop and see what sounds I can hear. Shop. Oh, I think I can hear the sh, sh, sh sound at the beginning. Sh, op, shop. There we go. Look, I've used my phonics to help me sound out and write my word. So there's my first sentence. He went to the shop. Now I'm going to say what he got. What did he get at the shop? Now there's 6 things that he got at the shop. So you can have a think about which one you want to talk about. But I think I'm going to talk about the shirt because it's got my sh and sound in it. He got a shirt. Oh, now do you think I've done the best sentence I could have done? I think I could add something to that sentence. What do you think I could add to that sentence to add some more detail and make it a bit more exciting? I could add an adjective, couldn't I? I could describe what the shirt is like to make it a bit more exciting and have a bit more detail. So he got a smart. Smart. I think I'm going to use the word smart. He got a smart shirt. There we go, and I've written it super neatly, and I've done my full stop and capital letters. Well done. I've checked it back to make sure that I've remembered my always checklist. Well done, everyone. Now it's your turn, okay? So you can have a look at the worksheet. There are 5 plot points for you to have a think about. Try to use some adjectives to add a bit more detail. You might want to try to use a suffix at the end of one of your words when we're talking about the scruffiest or coldest or comfiest. And remember our always checklist. Make sure you're reading back your sentences to make sure they make sense, okay? I can't wait to see your version of the smartest giant in town. Good luck.